Hello everybody, my name's Joe Quick and this is Joe's Quick Review. It's another point and click game today, Chronique de Silencieux. And I apologise in advance for brutalising the French language throughout this review. The English translation meaning something like Chronicles of the Silent. It's a delightful point and click detective game set in 1970s southern France. You play as Eugene Faury on his journey towards becoming a private inspector. Developed by Pierre Filleul Studio, the game gives me vibes of Hergé's Tintin and, if you like Broken Sword, Noir Chronicles, LA Noir and other games that require a fair amount of detective work or interpretation, then there's probably something in this for you. As a pre-warning, there is a lot of text in this game, no voice acting, and the puzzles can be really hard to solve. And whilst I really loved the story, I had to ask myself at times why they didn't decide to write a book or try for a Netflix series. Let's get into it. You're introduced to the story with a letter from your recently deceased mother, and she's left you with a parting gift, her recorder. This plays a key role in the game as you record people's statements and some other sounds along the way. For the majority of the game, you walk around town talking to people, collecting their testimonies on other topics and events. You will also collect a variety of items and documents that people will either give you or they are found somewhere within the scene. Then the other key element of the game is of course the puzzles, the first of which is following this guy's directions. It's really simple, but I was half expecting to step into a maze when I left the station. The puzzles actually consist of two parts. One is finding connections or contradictions between people's statements. For example, they said they were travelling alone, but the hotel invoice states 2 people were in the room. The second is making hypotheses. You do this by associating 2 topics with a motive or verb. For example, there were 2 people on the hotel invoice because person A was having an affair with person B, or maybe they were cheating on person C. Once you've made your hypothesis, you have a final confrontation in a fashion similar to the famous detective Poirot, where you pull all your evidence together to solve the case and end the chapter of the story. I really enjoy the graphics in this game. Each scene is like a little diorama. There's a great use of colour to bring the world to life, and all the minor details from cracking plaster and loose tiles on the buildings to the variety of wardrobe choices on the characters throughout the game. It really makes a difference. Obviously assets are reused, but it never really feels like you're looking at the same thing twice. Whilst the developers state they were inspired by Remy Shay's art style, the man behind 2015 animated feature Long Way North, it feels more like Hergé's ligne claire or clear line drawing style, which is perhaps why it reminds me so much of Tintin, plus of course all the detective work. The artwork is complemented with some nice animation and cutscenes, which is perhaps where Remy's art style is more apparent. The cutscenes are generally quite short animated pieces which progress the story and add a bit of variety from all the text in the game. Some animations are quite subtle and probably wouldn't go unnoticed if they were left out of the game, such as rattling keys. But this game really draws character from its, well, characters. For a game that is essentially just talking heads, it's great to see so much attention and detail put into the movements of the characters. Scratching their head or their chin, crossing their arms, little things people do when they're having a chat, even subtle features such as tapping their foot or raising an eyebrow. It's these elements that let you know what they're thinking, how they feel, and add more context to the dialogue. The story is amazing. If you like what's in the closet, family affairs, and historical dramas, you will love this. It also has a good amount of humour hidden within it as well, so it's not all doom and gloom war stories. As I mentioned before, this would make a great novel or a TV series, and it's also really well written, if you can forgive a number of translation errors. You follow the adventures of Eugene, a young boy who is not on good terms with his father, and his mother has recently passed away, so he moves to Bordeaux to live with his uncle. When he arrives in Bordeaux, he discovers that his uncle is in prison and mixed up in all sorts of misdemeanours. The police inspector promises to go easy on your uncle if you can help with the case, and so begins your journey to becoming a private inspector. But this is just the prologue. Once those matters are settled, an old friend asks you to investigate their past on behalf of their daughter. This is the beginning of a series of discoveries and surprises of how a family was impacted by the war and the challenges they faced to survive. I can't vouch for its historical accuracy, but it certainly all sounds believable, if not a little too detailed at times. I have been praising the game so far, but this is where it takes a turn, and a large part of that is because of the bugs. I'm playing version 3.8 in March 2024, so if you're playing a later version, hopefully these have been fixed. Overlooking the issues, the UI is nicely presented. There is a pause icon on the screen and a button to open your inventory. This minimises the amount of clutter when viewing the overall scene and hunting for clues. In the inventory menu, you can navigate the menus to view documents, testimonies and leads on the investigation. Red dots highlight new information and things are crossed through in red when they are no longer relevant. This makes navigating all the text just a little bit easier. The game's two core puzzle mechanics are connections and hypotheses. You can make connections between text by holding down the mouse button, and you can make hypotheses using two topics with a verb and then holding down the mouse button to turn the lock. Nice ideas and visual representations of the task, but given how many of these you are likely to make, it's a bit long-winded. Simply reducing the time it takes would be a big improvement here. Another area that needs some work is the tutorials. They have a tendency to leave you guessing what you're meant to do or click on next, and whilst I appreciate it's a puzzle game, solving the tutorial shouldn't be part of the process. Continuing the topic of UI with controls, throughout the game you'll see little gold icons, allowing you to talk or interact with things. You can click on these, or approach them and hit enter on the keyboard. Now, at its heart the game is a point and click adventure, but there are also elements of click and drag, and you can also play with the keyboard, using the arrow keys to navigate and the enter button to perform actions. But some elements, such as the cutscenes, didn't acknowledge the keyboard entry, so I generally found myself reverting back to the mouse. It's certainly not a game changer, but it's nice to have some options around how I want to play the game. You can also use the mouse wheel or plus and minus buttons to zoom in and out of the scenes. Personally, I would have entered the scene zoomed out, with the option to zoom in, as in most cases the zoom setting was set too high, but the game does remember your zoom settings, so when you revisit a scene, it should have the same distance. There's lots and lots of talking in this game, but no social activities to be had in the real world. The same can be said for replayability. Revisiting this game is the same as picking up a good book. The story isn't going to change, the puzzles remain the same. The only thing I can hope for if I play this again is fewer glitches. But again, I will emphasise it's a really interesting story, so that in itself may be enough to draw you back in for another round. Let's talk about the soundtrack. You're going around town recording people and other sounds. It's almost like being a music producer. Eugene. Perhaps not. The game has a variety of songs with a funky, jazz noir kind of vibe, or a slightly French aesthetic. But beyond the music, which is a nice fit for the game, there aren't many more sounds to mention. The hustle and bustle of people in the market, and different footsteps for wooden floors or concrete roads. It truly is a shame that this game doesn't have voice acting. Whilst I appreciate this would be a significant task and cost for the developers, it would be such a relief to be able to listen to these characters rather than read through all the dialogue, especially as you will probably have to read it again and again to solve some of the puzzles. The game is currently available in French and English, with some translation errors, but improvements are being made. With its current glitches, it's a challenge for anyone to play, but once those are resolved, it does offer multiple input methods, mouse and keyboard, to best suit your gameplay style. Any other forms of configuration are lacking, so if you're struggling with the font size or the colour palette, I'm afraid that can't be changed at this stage. I won't go into much detail regarding the Kickstarter. The project was looking for a humble €15,000 and managed to get just over 16,000, so they didn't reach any of their stretch goals to add extra content to the game, but that may be for the best as the original product still needs some attention. But if you wanted to run your own Kickstarter, I would recommend checking out their campaign page, as it is well presented and a good example of content and layout. The game started as an attempt to make the discrepancy mechanic in the game Papers, Please into a full-blown detective game, pulling additional inspiration from Detective Grimoire series and wrapping it all up with the intensity of the denouement, where the detective reveals all the clues and builds the conclusion to the case. Knowing that this was their design principle, I can happily say they achieved their goal. I still can't decide if it was a good idea or not. At its core, the game is a point-and-click puzzle adventure, but then it is layered and layered with dialogue. Again, it's a great story, but you're going to have to dig through some of the dialogue multiple times to find the exact match the game wants you to make, even if you made the connection in your head an hour earlier. Putting that aside, when you do make the connection, you get a great sense of achievement, or possibly that's the sense of relief. It's a good feeling. But you would probably get the same feeling if you can kick a football into an empty goal from the halfway line, and that sounds considerably easier and less time consuming than some moments in this game. My point being, few people are going to have the patience to wade through all the text to find the solution, unless they are an aspiring lawyer and want to get some practice finding that needle in a haystack of documents. In game design you will always have a target audience, lawyers in this case, but you need to consider the wider audience for the sake of its success. You won't have a successful game if only 10 people play it and only 2 of those bother to complete it. And I'm not saying it's a bad game, it's just very unforgiving. It would benefit from a better hint system or some subtle guidance. An example would be Eugene highlighting dialogue he thought was of interest, or commenting if he had exhausted all possible solutions on a topic. The other gaming mechanics are nice. The visual representation of making a connection and people locking themselves away are great, but again, in a game where so much time is spent making comparisons, it would be nice to see the interaction and animation time reduced slightly. When you have to try 10 or more variations of a hypothesis, this 30-second key turn feels like a lifetime. Stepping away from the mechanics and talking about the artwork momentarily, I feel I have to do a shout out for Spine. This isn't sponsored, but Spine is a 2D skinning and rigging software which looks amazing and helped produce the character animations in this game, along with other popular games such as Return to Monkey Island and Cult of the Lamb. As I mentioned before, the game wouldn't be the same without its great animations bringing it to life. So as a final verdict, I love the art and style of the game. The story is really well written and delivered, but the puzzles are a bit brutal. If you're going in, put on your detective hat and grab a magnifying glass, you'll need it. But once all the bugs are out of the way and they upgrade the hint system, I'd fully recommend unraveling the Chronique de Silencieux. The game is currently available on Steam, but the team have stated they hope to bring it to other PC platforms like itch and GOG. I suspect they will aim to resolve the bugs before spreading it throughout the market, so you may have to wait a while to see it elsewhere. If you've played the game, let me know your thoughts, or if you do pick up a copy and need help solving the case, check out my walkthrough. That's it for today, keep gaming and I'll catch you next time.